Welcome to Toon 21B Stories, where every story invites you into a world of secrets and surprises. Grab your coffee, stay curious, and share the thrill with fellow mystery lovers. Let's get started, Sherlock Holmes and the Adventure of the Noble Bachelor chapter. It was a grim and cheerless afternoon when the case first arrived at 221B Baker Street. The usual London fog had thickened into an almost impenetrable wall outside our window, wrapping the city in an eerie stillness that muffled even the clatter of hooves upon the cobbled streets below. Holmes sat in his usual chair, fingers steepled, his gaze unfocused, a sign, I knew, that his mind was engaged in some intricate battle with the forces of logic and disorder. We, for my part, had been attempting to read the day's edition of The Times, but I found my eyes returning again and again to my companion. There was a peculiar restlessness about him, an anticipation of the unknown that only a fresh enigma could satisfy. The silence between us was broken by the soft rapping of a knuckle upon our door. "Enter!" Holmes called without hesitation. The door creaked open, and a familiar figure stepped inside, brushing raindrops from his coat. Inspector Lestrade, his thin face lined with irritation, wasted no time in stepping forward. "Holmes," he began without preamble, "I have something for you. Something rather impossible." Holmes arched an eyebrow, betraying only the faintest interest. "A contradiction of reality itself, Lestrade. How refreshing. Do sit down." Lestrade hesitated but took the offered seat. "There was a murder last night, or at least there should have been." He exhaled sharply and set a single sheet of paper upon the table before Holmes. I leaned forward and read the short report. Hugh Montigue, Lord of Chiswick, found dead in his study at Montigue House. Cause of death unknown. Discovered by valet at dawn. A straightforward enough crime. But then my eyes caught the final line. No record of Hugh Montigue, Lord of Chiswick, exists. I blinked, scanning the paper again. Surely it was a typographical error. Holmes's fingers drummed against his chair. "Curious," he murmured. "Tell me, Lestrade, what exactly do you mean by 'no record exists'?" Lestrade shook his head. "I mean precisely that. We received the report from the household staff this morning, but when we checked the records, government files, birth certificates, even land ownership documents, there is no trace of any Lord Montigue. It's as if the man never existed." I let out a breath. That's absurd. The man has an estate, a title, a household. He had to have existed. Lestrade leaned forward. "His servants remember him. The house staff swear up and down that he's been their employer for years. And yet," he gestured helplessly, "no records, no official documents, nothing. In the Times archives, even his legal will has vanished." Holmes was silent for a long moment, his gaze sharp and unblinking. Then, with a faint sigh, he rose to his feet. "Well, Lestrade, I do believe you have my attention. Before moving to the next chapter, let us know where you are watching from. And if you love stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another incredible story waiting for you. Chapter 2. By the time Holmes, Lestrade, and I had boarded a hansom cab bound for Montigue House, the mist that had settled over London had thickened into a smothering veil. The gas lamps lining the streets struggled against the oppressive gloom, their flickering light swallowed by the shadows curling at the edges of the city. Holmes sat in silence, his long fingers tapping absently against the head of his cane. Lestrade, on the other hand, fidgeted restlessly beside me, clearly perturbed by the sheer impossibility of the case he had brought us. "You said the servants recall their employer," Holmes murmured suddenly. "Did you question them personally?" Lestrade nodded. "I did. The butler, the housekeeper, even the footman, all insist they've served Lord Montigue for years. But when I asked them for details about his life, where he was born, who his associates were—" He exhaled sharply. "It's the strangest thing, Holmes. They couldn't tell me. They know him, they remember working for him, but anything beyond that? It's like trying to hold water in your hands. Slips right through." Holmes's lips curled faintly, though whether in amusement or intrigue I could not say. "Memory is a peculiar thing, Lestrade. It is often more fragile than we realize, though I suspect in this case it is not a mere matter of forgetfulness." Our conversation lapsed into silence as the cab rattled along the damp streets. When at last we reached the gates of Montague House, I found myself staring at an estate that should have been grand, but instead it felt eerily absent. The iron gates were ajar, their paint peeling, as though years of neglect had eaten away at them. The drive leading up to the house was overgrown, the cobblestones uneven and slick with moss, and the house itself, what should have been a stately manor, stood in the dim light like a spectre of its former self. Lestrade cursed under his breath. "That wasn't like this yesterday." "Indeed," Holmes mused, "it seems we are witnessing decay at an unnatural rate." We approached the front door, and Lestrade rapped sharply against the wood. After a long pause, it swung open, revealing a middle-aged butler with a pale, drawn face. "Inspector," the man said, his voice hollow, I wasn't sure if you would return." Holmes's gaze sharpened. "Why would you doubt that, Mr. Barrow, sir? George Barrow, butler to the late Lord Montague." Holmes nodded. "And why the uncertainty, Mr. Barrow?" The butler swallowed. "Because—" He hesitated, glancing over his shoulder before lowering his voice. "Because I was afraid you might forget too." A chill passed through me at the words. Holmes, however, merely stepped forward. "Then you had best show us what remains before the memory of this place vanishes entirely." The butler led us inside, and I had the unsettling sensation that we were stepping into a house that no longer wished to be seen. Chapter 3. We stepped into the grand hall of Montague House. Though grand, no longer felt an appropriate term for it. The air was thick with dust, as though the house had been abandoned for decades, yet Barrow and the other staff had spoken of its late owner as if he had been alive and well mere days ago. The chandeliers, though ornate, had gathered layers of grime that dulled their former brilliance. The floorboards beneath our feet groaned like the weary bones of an ancient creature, protesting our intrusion. Shadows curled along the edges of the room, unnaturally deep, as if the very house resisted illumination. Holmes's sharp gaze swept the space with its usual precision. "Mr. Barrow, before we proceed further, tell me, when was the last time you saw Lord Montague alive?" The butler, his fingers twitching at his sides. 2 nights ago, sir. He dined in his study, as he often did. I brought him his brandy and retired for the night. The next morning he was—" He swallowed. "Gone." Lestrade frowned. "Gone? You mean dead?" Barrow shook his head. "No, Inspector. I mean gone. The room was empty. His bed had not been slept in, and yet—" His voice grew hoarse. "And yet we all remembered him being here the night before. We knew he had been here, but there was nothing, no trace of him." Holmes turned on his heel, pacing slowly. "And when did the decay set in?" Barrow's lips parted, but no words emerged. His brow furrowed deeply, as though he struggled to grasp something just out of reach. I don't know," he admitted at last. "The house was fine yesterday. Now it looks as though it has been abandoned for years." A peculiar expression flickered across Holmes's face, somewhere between fascination and calculation. "Interesting," he murmured. I exchanged a glance with Lestrade. "Holmes, what are you thinking?" "My dear Watson, I am considering a troubling possibility." He turned abruptly to the butler. "Mr. Barrow, are you certain this is Montague House?" Barrow blinked, clearly startled. "Sir?" Holmes's voice was gentle but insistent. "Are you certain that this—" He gestured to the crumbling walls, the decaying furniture, the oppressive gloom. "Is the same house you served in 2 nights ago?" Barrow opened his mouth, then closed it again. His expression twisted in growing horror. I don't know." His voice trembled. "It looks like Montague House, but it feels wrong." A silence stretched between us, heavy with the weight of something unseen. I became suddenly aware of the faint sound of the wind rattling the windows. Only there was no wind outside. The air had been eerily still since our arrival. Holmes exhaled softly, as though arriving at a conclusion only he understood. He turned sharply to Lestrade. "Inspector, I suggest we examine the study at once. If there is any remnant of our vanishing nobleman, it will be there." Lestrade nodded, eager to move the investigation forward and away from the growing unease permeating the air. Barrow, however, lingered, his pale face taut with barely concealed fear. "You won't find him," he whispered. "You won't find anything. And soon you won't remember why you came." His words sent an involuntary shiver down my spine. But Holmes merely regarded him with an expression of cool certainty. "Then we had best hurry," he said, "before the house swallows us too." Chapter 4. The hallway leading to Lord Montague's study was dimly lit, the sconces on the walls holding only the weakest of flames, their glow struggling against the encroaching darkness. The air here felt heavier, the silence pressing against us like an unseen force. Each footstep echoed unnaturally, as though the house itself had grown cavernous, hollowed out by something unseen. Holmes led the way, his movements deliberate and unhurried, his keen eyes sweeping across the corridor with an intensity I had come to recognize. He was not merely looking, he was registering. Every detail, every imperfection, every whisper of something wrong. Lestrade, less composed, huffed impatiently. "I'll tell you this much, Holmes. I've worked some strange cases, but this—" He gestured to the decaying walls, the dust-laden carpet that seemed untouched despite the presence of staff. "This feels wrong." Holmes did not respond. Instead, he reached the door to the study and placed a hand against it. He hesitated, an act so uncharacteristic of him that it sent a bolt of unease through me. Then, with a sharp exhale, he pushed the door open. The room was precisely as Barrow had described, empty. No body, no blood, no sign of struggle. And yet the very air was thick with something unseen, something oppressive. The study was lavishly furnished, but everything bore the weight of time in a way that felt unnatural. Bookshelves lined the walls, their spines thick with dust. A grand oak desk stood at the centre of the room, a crystal decanter still half filled with brandy, undisturbed, untouched. The high-backed chair behind the desk stood slightly askew, as if someone had just risen from it. Lestrade stepped forward, running a hand over the desk's surface. His brow furrowed. "Holmes, this dust!" He lifted his fingers, showing the thick layer that clung to his gloves. "If someone was here 2 nights ago, why does it look like nothing has been touched for years?" Holmes knelt beside the desk, his long fingers trailing lightly along the edge of the chair. "A most intriguing question, Inspector. And yet, I suspect the better question is—" He straightened abruptly. "Why does it appear untouched when we know it was occupied?" I frowned. "What are you suggesting?" Holmes did not answer immediately. Instead, he turned to the nearest bookshelf and reached for a single volume. He pulled it free with ease, too much ease. When he turned it over, I saw why. The book was blank. No title, no embossing, no author's name. Just an unmarked leather cover worn at the edges. Holmes flipped it open, revealing page after page of nothing, just yellowed parchment without a single word. Lestrade swore. "What in God's name is this?" Holmes turned another page, then another, his expression betraying no outward shock, though I knew him well enough to recognize the slight tension in his jaw. He closed the book and returned it to the shelf. "The study has been erased," he said simply. A chill ran down my spine. "Erased? What do you mean?" Holmes turned to face us fully. "This room, this house, does not suffer from mere neglect. It suffers from something far more insidious. Not decay, not abandonment, but deliberate erasure." He gestured to the desk, the untouched brandy, the chair still pulled slightly from its place. "Lord Montigue was here. He did exist. And yet something, someone, has made it so that reality itself no longer acknowledges it." Lestrade exhaled sharply. "That's impossible, Holmes. A man can die, but he can't just be erased from history." Holmes's gaze darkened. "Can't he?" For a long moment, none of us spoke. The house creaked around us. The silence, stretching, deepening. Then Barrow's voice, small and frail, broke the hush. "I told you," he whispered from the doorway. His pale fingers clutched at the frame, as though he needed it to stay upright. "You won't find anything, and soon you won't remember why you were looking." Chapter 5 Barrow's words lingered in the air like a spectre, refusing to dissipate. Holmes, ever composed, merely turned his sharp gaze upon the trembling butler. "You seem remarkably aware of this phenomenon, Mr. Barrow," he said calmly. "Tell me, what exactly do you mean by 'we won't remember'?" The butler's face was pale, his eyes darting toward the study, as if afraid to meet Holmes's stare. "I mean what I said, sir. You've come here to investigate Lord Montague. But the longer you stay, the less you'll recall why you came. First small details, then entire conversations, until in the end you'll leave this house with no memory of ever stepping foot inside." Lestrade scoffed. "Rubbish! I know precisely why we're here. A man's gone missing, vanished if you like, but I don't believe in fairy stories about people disappearing from history." Barrow's lips pressed into a thin line. "Then tell me, Inspector, what was his first name?" Lestrade opened his mouth, then hesitated. I felt the same flicker of unease settle over me. We had been speaking of Lord Montigue since arriving, discussing his missing presence, the decay of his estate, the impossible erasure of his records. But now, standing in the gloom of his study, I realized with a sickening jolt that I could not recall his given name. I turned to Holmes, who regarded the situation with unsettling calm. "Well, Watson," he said, "what was it?" My throat was dry. I don't know." Lestrade's face darkened. "It's just a trick. We never said it aloud, that's all. Let's check the documents we brought from Scotland Yard." He fumbled inside his coat, retrieving the single sheet of paper he had shown us at Baker Street. The case report listing Lord Montague's name, estate, and supposed death. He unfolded it, eyes scanning rapidly. Then his hands clenched around, the edges of the page. "It's gone," he muttered. "His name, his bloody name, it's not here." I stepped forward, glancing at the document. The report still detailed our arrival at the scene, the statements from the servants, the mention of the missing nobleman. But where the name should have been, there was only an empty space. No ink had been scratched away, no letters faded, just an absence, as if no name had ever been written. The unease thickened into dread. Holmes, still unreadable, took the paper from Lestrade, running his fingers over it. "Ah," he murmured, "now this is fascinating." "Fascinating," Lestrade snapped. "This is madness. Someone's playing tricks with us, Holmes. It has to be some forgery, some—" Holmes silenced him with a sharp glance. "Calm yourself, Inspector. You are allowing your panic to dictate your reasoning." Lestrade bristled but said nothing. Holmes returned his attention to the case report. "Tell me, Watson, when did you first hear of this case?" I frowned. "You know that, Holmes. Lestrade brought it to us this morning." Holmes's gaze did not waver. "And what did he say?" I opened my mouth to reply, then faltered. The memory of our conversation, though only hours old, felt blurred. I remembered Lestrade arriving at Baker Street, his expression tense, his words clipped. I remembered him mentioning an impossible case, a missing nobleman, the vanishing records. But now the details wavered, the sequence of events slipping from my grasp. It was like trying to recall a dream after waking, intangible, dissolving even as I reached for it. Holmes studied my face for a moment, then nodded. "Precisely." I swallowed. "Holmes, what are you saying?" His eyes gleamed in the dim light. "That we are dealing with an entity, an intelligence, capable not only of removing a man from existence, but of erasing the memory of his existence from those who knew him." He tapped the case report. "We are standing in the remains of something that should not be, Watson, and whatever force is responsible is watching us even now, ensuring we do not remember too much." Lestrade exhaled sharply. "And you mean to tell me you're not disturbed by this?" Holmes allowed himself a small, enigmatic, smile. "On the contrary, Inspector, I find it irresistible." The butler shifted uneasily. "You should leave," he murmured, "before it's too late." Holmes turned to him, considering. "That would be the logical course of action, Mr. Barrow. However, I have never been fond of retreating from a mystery." Lestrade ran a hand down his face. "And what do you propose we do, then?" Holmes stepped toward the desk, where the crystal decanter still sat undisturbed. He lifted it carefully, swirling the amber liquid inside before setting it down with precision. "We give it something to erase," he said. I frowned. "What do you mean?" Holmes's smirk widened. "If an enemy insists on removing our steps from the board, then we must leave a mark too bold to be wiped away so easily." He turned to Lestrade. "We are going to reconstruct Montague's existence, piece by piece, and force this unseen hand to reveal itself." Lestrade let out a dry laugh. "And how exactly do you plan to do that?" Holmes's expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, a spark, a challenge. "We start with what cannot be erased," he said, "and for that we must find someone who remembers." His gaze flicked back to the butler. "Tell me, Mr. Barrow, do you recall where Lord Montague was before he disappeared?" The butler hesitated. Then, with a visible effort, he exhaled. "Yes," he whispered, "he was with them." Holmes's fingers tapped lightly against the desk. "And who, pray, is them?" Barrow's hands trembled. "The ones who decide who exists." Chapter 6 Barrow's whispered words seemed to drain the room of warmth. The oppressive stillness of Montague House deepened, as if the walls themselves recoiled from the truth he had spoken. Holmes, however, remained unmoved, his sharp eyes fixed on the trembling butler. "Them?" he repeated. His voice was soft, but carried the weight of certainty. "Who are they, Mr. Barrow?" Barrow shook his head violently. "I cannot say," he rasped, "not because I do not want to, but because I do not know. I only know that they exist, that they watch, that they choose." Lestrade exhaled sharply, crossing his arms. "More riddles, wonderful! And what exactly do they choose, Barrow?" Barrow's gaze flickered towards the darkened window, his voice barely more than a breath. "Who is remembered, and who is forgotten?" The weight of his words settled uneasily between us. Even Lestrade, ever the sceptic, hesitated before scoffing. "That's ridiculous. You're suggesting there's some secret society. What, a group of men in dark cloaks, deciding who stays in history and who vanishes?" Barrow's lips pressed into a thin line. "I am suggesting nothing, Inspector. I am telling you what I have seen." Holmes leaned forward slightly. "And what, precisely, have you seen?" Barrow swallowed. 3 nights ago, my master received a letter. He did not allow me to read it, but I saw the seal. An insignia unlike any I had encountered before. An eye enclosed within a perfect circle, surrounded by symbols I did not recognize. When he opened it, he grew afraid. I frowned. "Afraid? A nobleman of standing does not frighten so easily, Barrow. What was in the letter?" "I do not know," Barrow admitted, "but I saw him burn it in the fireplace. He told me that if they sent a letter, it was already too late." Lestrade rubbed his temples. "So, let me get this straight. A man receives a cryptic letter, burns it, disappears, and somehow his entire existence is wiped clean from history, and we're supposed to believe they did it. Holmes, tell me you're not buying this nonsense." Holmes did not answer immediately. Instead, he turned to the fireplace, his gaze sweeping the edges of the charred logs within. Then, without a word, he plucked a small iron poker from its stand and prodded the ashes gently. A flicker of white caught the firelight. Holmes reached down and carefully extracted the delicate scrap of parchment that had been buried beneath the charred remains of Montague's final correspondence. Though most of it had burned away, a portion of the seal remained, the unmistakable symbol of an eye encased in a perfect circle. For the first time since our arrival, Holmes's composure shifted ever so slightly. His fingers tightened around the fragment. "Lestrade," he said calmly, though there was an edge to his voice, "you once told me that Scotland Yard keeps an archive of secret societies and criminal organizations, did you not?" Lestrade frowned. "Yes, of course, but nothing like this. Regardless," Holmes interrupted, slipping the fragment into his pocket. "We shall pay a visit to your archives at once. I have a suspicion that this is not the first time history has been rewritten by unseen hands." Barrow's expression darkened. "You won't find what you seek, Mr. Holmes. They do not leave records. They erase them." Holmes turned to him with a ghost of a smile. "Then we shall see how well they fare against me." I shivered at the certainty in his tone. Holmes, for all his brilliance, had never encountered a case like this before, and as we stepped out of Montigue House into the fog-drenched streets of London, I could not shake the dreadful certainty that we were walking into something far greater than any of us could comprehend. Chapter 7. The hansom cab rattled through the mist-laden streets of London, the gas lamps casting elongated shadows upon the damp cobblestones. The city, usually brimming with activity even at this late hour, felt eerily subdued, as though it too had sensed the presence of something unseen, something that watched and waited. Lestrade sat stiffly across from us, his arms crossed, his expression twisted with skepticism. "Holmes, I still say this is madness," he muttered. "Secret societies, erased names, a nobleman vanishing into nothing. Sounds more like some penny dreadful than a real case." Holmes, undeterred, merely studied the fragment of parchment retrieved from Montague's study. Though most of it had burned, the circular insignia of the eye remained, staring, unblinking, as though mocking the very notion of being forgotten. "Every great truth, Lestrade," Holmes murmured, "was once dismissed as madness." Lestrade huffed but said nothing more. I turned to my friend. "You believe we will find something in the Scotland Yard archives?" Holmes's fingers drummed lightly against his knee. "I believe, Watson, that our adversaries take great care in concealing their existence. However, the mere act of erasure leaves behind a void, an absence, a discrepancy, and in a system as meticulous as the British legal archives, even a void can be revealing." Lestrade gave a sceptical grunt. "We'll see." The cab slowed as we approached Scotland Yard. The great stone facade loomed ahead, its gaslit corridors casting an amber glow against the darkened city. Holmes stepped out first, moving with purpose, his coat swirling behind him like a shadow. Inside, The night clerk barely glanced up from his desk as Lestrade led us toward the restricted archives. "You're looking for records on secret societies?" he asked, flipping through a worn ledger. "We've got files on the Freemasons, the Hermetic Order, a few defunct anarchist cells." "Not quite," Holmes interrupted smoothly. "I require records on an organization associated with this." He placed the fragment of parchment on the desk, his fingertip tapping the remaining symbol. The clerk squinted at it, frowning. "Strange. Looks familiar, but I don't recall seeing it in any official file. Hold on!" He turned, shuffling toward a set of iron filing cabinets marked Restricted Records. With a clang, he pulled open a drawer and began flipping through thick folders, occasionally muttering under his breath. Holmes and I exchanged a glance. Something felt wrong. A few moments later, the clerk returned, looking perplexed. "That's odd," he muttered. "I know we had a file on this symbol. I've seen it before. Some conspiracy about missing persons, erased documents. Where is the file?" Holmes pressed. The clerk's fingers twitched. "It's gone." Silence fell between us. Lestrade's jaw tightened. "Gone? You mean misfiled?" The clerk shook his head slowly. "No, I mean removed. There's a gap in the records where it should be. I remember filing it myself years ago, but now it's as if it never existed." Holmes's lips curved ever so slightly. "Precisely what I expected." I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. "Holmes, if they can remove records from Scotland Yard, then they have influence beyond what we anticipated," he finished, "which means we are dealing with something far older and more deeply embedded than a mere criminal conspiracy." Lestrade exhaled through his nose, clearly unsettled. "So what now, Holmes? If the files are gone, where do we even begin?" Holmes turned, back to the clerk. "Tell me, my good man, who was the last person to access these records before us?" The clerk hesitated. "Well, that's just it, sir. The logbook shows no one has requested that file in years." Holmes' expression darkened. "Yet it is missing all the same." Lestrade rubbed his temples. "Brilliant. So now we've got vanishing men and vanishing evidence." Holmes was silent for a long moment. Then, with sudden decisiveness, he turned on his heel. "Come, gentlemen, we have one final place to check before the night is through." I followed without question, though unease gnawed at my thoughts. And where might that be? Holmes glanced back, his voice unreadable. The British Library. Chapter 8. The great halls of the British Library loomed ahead, their massive stone columns standing like silent sentinels against the encroaching London fog. Even at this late hour, a dim glow emanated from within, casting flickering shadows through the tall windows. Holmes, ever composed, strode ahead with the certainty of a man who had already envisioned every possible outcome. Lestrade and I followed, though I could not shake the gnawing sense that we were drawing ever closer to something we were not meant to find. The night librarian, a gaunt fellow with wire-rimmed spectacles perched on his narrow nose, peered at us as we entered. "Odd hour for a visit, gentlemen," he remarked in a whispery voice. Holmes wasted no time with pleasantries. "I require access to historical records pertaining to esoteric societies. particularly those dealing in the manipulation of records and historical erasure. The librarian's bushy brows knitted together. A rather peculiar request. Holmes tapped a finger against the polished wood of the counter. And yet you do not seem surprised. The librarian hesitated. No, because this is not the first time someone has come looking for such things. Lestrade straightened. Who else has been asking? The librarian removed his glasses, rubbing them with the edge of his sleeve. A man came just 3 nights past, tall, severe in appearance. He asked after the same records you seek. I tensed. And did you provide them? The librarian replaced his glasses, his eyes shadowed. I tried, but they were not here. Holmes's gaze sharpened. Not here? The librarian exhaled slowly. I have worked in this library for over 30 years, gentlemen. I know every section, every tome, every classified record within its archives. And yet, the books concerning certain organizations, certain patterns of missing persons and altered records, were simply gone. A chill settled over us. Holmes turned to Lestrade. A missing nobleman, erased records at Scotland Yard, and now entire historical accounts vanished from the most extensive library in Britain. Tell me, Inspector, do you still believe we are chasing ghosts? Lestrade muttered a curse under his breath. Holmes turned back to the librarian. And this man, did he leave anything behind? Any notes? Any indication of his intentions? The librarian hesitated again, then reached beneath the counter and withdrew a small slip of paper. He handed it to Holmes. I leaned in as Holmes unfolded it. Scrawled in ink, in neat yet hurried handwriting, were 3 words. Find the cartographer. Lestrade frowned. Cartographer? What the devil does that mean? Holmes studied the note with narrowed eyes. A cartographer, Inspector, is one who maps the world. But in this case, I suspect our mystery man does not concern himself with geography in the conventional sense. I swallowed. Then what does he map? Holmes looked up, his gaze burning with quiet intensity. Reality itself. A thick silence followed his words. Lestrade shook his head. I'm beginning to wish I'd never brought this case to you, Holmes. Holmes allowed a faint smirk. But now we are in the thick of it, my dear Lestrade. And when one walks in the fog, the only way out is forward. The librarian cleared his throat softly. If you are to find your answers, gentlemen, you must tread carefully. There are forces at work here that do not wish to be seen. Holmes slipped the note into his pocket. Then it is fortunate that I make a habit of finding the unseen. With that, he turned on his heel, his mind already moving ahead of us all. Watson, we have a cartographer to find. Chapter 9. The morning fog had not yet lifted when Holmes, Lestrade, and I found ourselves standing before a nondescript shop, tucked away in a forgotten corner of the city. The sign above the door read, E. Godfrey, cartographer and specialist in antiquarian maps. It was an establishment I had never noticed before, despite its apparent age. The windows were clouded with dust, the wooden door slightly warped with time. It felt like a place out of step with reality, hidden in plain sight, yet ignored by those who passed it daily. Holmes stepped forward first, his fingers grazing the brass handle before he gave it a firm turn. The door creaked open, and we stepped inside. The scent of aged parchment and ink filled the dimly lit space. Maps of all sizes covered the walls, some pinned in elaborate frames, others rolled and stacked in wooden cabinets. The air was thick with an almost oppressive silence, the kind found in places where time itself seemed reluctant to move forward. At the far end of the shop, behind a cluttered desk piled with yellowed manuscripts, sat a man hunched over a piece of parchment. His fingers traced its edges carefully, as though committing every line to memory. Holmes took a step forward. "E. Godfrey, I presume?" The man did not look up. "That depends, Mr. Holmes, on whether you are seeking maps of places that exist or places that should not." Lestrade stiffened beside me. "How the devil does he know your name?" Holmes remained unfazed. "A calculated assumption, no doubt. I would expect no less from a man in your position, Mr. Godfrey." At last, the cartographer lifted his gaze. His face was lined with age, yet his eyes were sharp, knowing. He studied us for a long moment before nodding slightly. "You were expected," he murmured. "Perhaps not by me, but by the ones who move the pieces," I frowned. "What pieces?" Godfrey let out a slow breath and reached beneath his desk. He withdrew a single sheet of parchment, unfolding it carefully before placing it on the table before us. "Tell me, gentlemen," he said softly, "what do you see?" We leaned in. At first glance, it was a standard map, an old, beautifully detailed rendering of London, its streets meticulously drawn in fine black ink. But as I studied it, something felt wrong. The lines seemed to shift, subtly, yet unmistakably. Certain streets faded even as I looked at them. Landmarks I knew to exist were absent. In their place, new alleys and corridors emerged, places I had never seen, never heard of, yet felt faintly familiar. Lestrade cursed. What in God's name? Holmes's expression was unreadable. "This is not a map of London as it is, nor as it was." His fingers traced one of the shifting streets. "It is London as it has been rewritten." Godfrey nodded. "The ones you seek, the ones who erase, do not merely remove names, they remove places, entire histories, until no record of them remains. But they cannot erase everything." His voice dropped to a near whisper. "Because I remember." A chill crept along my spine. Lestrade shook his head. "This is absurd. You're saying they—" "What? Change reality? Alter history?" Godfrey's lips pressed into a thin line. "Not change, not alter, curate." Holmes exhaled softly. "A most unsettling implication." The cartographer leaned forward, his gaze dark. "And yet you are here, which means you have encountered something they have failed to erase entirely." He turned the map slightly. "You are searching for a man who no longer exists, are you not?" Holmes nodded. Godfrey's fingers tapped lightly against a blank space on the map. "Then look here." I followed his motion, and my breath caught. In the heart of London, where I knew streets and buildings should be, there was only an empty void, as though a portion of the city had been scrubbed away. "That," Godfrey murmured, "is where he was." Holmes's voice was quiet but firm. "And what happens if we go there?" Godfrey's expression did not change. "You will see what they do not wish you to see." The silence that followed was suffocating. Holmes straightened. "Then we leave at once." Godfrey did not stop us. He only watched as we turned for the door, his voice carrying one final warning as we stepped into the fog-drenched streets. "Be careful, Mr. Holmes. Some things, once seen, cannot be unseen." Chapter 10. The fog had thickened by the time we left the cartographer's shop, curling around us like a living thing, muffling the sounds of the city as we followed the path Holmes had traced upon the shifting map. Lestrade, still sceptical, walked with heavy steps beside me, his discomfort evident in the stiffness of his shoulders. "You do realize," he muttered, "that we are searching for a place that doesn't exist." Holmes, undeterred, pressed forward. "Quite the opposite, Inspector. We are searching for a place that did exist, until it was made to disappear." Lestrade huffed but did not argue further. I pulled my coat tighter against the damp chill. "Holmes, if what the cartographer suggested is true, and someone has deliberately erased this location from history, then what exactly are we expecting to find?" Holmes did not slow his stride. "A void, Watson, and within that void a truth someone wished forgotten." We continued in silence, navigating the labyrinthine streets of London. The deeper we went, the more unsettling the city became. Street names we should have recognized felt strangely unfamiliar. Gas lamps flickered uncertainly, their light failing to reach the cobblestones below. The very air seemed heavier, as though we were walking through a place removed from time itself. And then we reached it, or rather, we should have. We stood at the precise location indicated on the map, the place where, according to Godfrey, our missing nobleman had once lived. But before us lay nothing more than an alleyway, narrow and featureless, stretching into darkness. Lestrade swore under his breath. "There's nothing here." Holmes's expression was unreadable. "No, Inspector, that is precisely the point." I turned, in a slow circle studying our surroundings. "Holmes, are you certain?" But as I spoke, something strange happened. The air shifted almost imperceptibly, like a ripple on the surface of a still pond. A sensation, not quite a sound, not quite a movement, passed through us. And suddenly, where there had been only empty space, something was. A building, a grand townhouse, half shrouded in mist, its edges indistinct as though seen through a veil of gauze. Its windows were dark, its facade worn with the passage of time. Yet there was no mistaking it. This was a structure that had not been here mere seconds ago. Lestrade staggered back. "What in God's name?" Holmes stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with sharp interest. "Fascinating!" I swallowed hard. "Holmes, this isn't possible." Holmes turned to me, his expression calm but purposeful. "And yet, Watson, we are seeing it." The house loomed before us, silent and waiting. Holmes reached for the door. "Holmes, wait," I said, my pulse quickening. "If someone went to such great lengths to erase this place, do you truly believe we should step inside?" Holmes met my gaze. "That is precisely why we must." And with that, he turned the handle and stepped into the house that should not exist. Chapter 11. The door creaked open, revealing a darkness so complete that it seemed to devour the dim light spilling in from the fog-drenched street. Holmes stepped inside without hesitation, his silhouette swallowed by the abyss. Lestrade, muttering a curse under his breath, followed. I lingered for a moment, a cold weight pressing against my chest before forcing myself forward. The air inside was thick with an unnatural stillness. It was not merely the absence of sound, but the sensation that sound itself had been removed, stripped from the walls and floorboards. Even our footsteps were muted, swallowed by the oppressive silence. Lestrade exhaled sharply. This place, it feels wrong. Holmes, who had already moved deeper into the foyer, turned slightly. A peculiar observation, Inspector, given that this house should not exist at all. I peered through the dimness. The architecture was grand, its design reminiscent of the stately homes of London's elite. Tall ceilings, intricate moulding, a sweeping staircase leading to the upper floors, but there was something off about it. The angles seemed slightly skewed, the proportions subtly incorrect, as though the space itself were resisting definition. "Holmes," I murmured, "where do we even begin?" He motioned toward the far end of the hall, where a set of double doors stood slightly ajar. With the last place our missing nobleman was seen. We moved cautiously, the wooden floor beneath our feet unnervingly smooth, devoid of dust or the creak of aging boards. It was as if no one had ever walked here before. Lestrade gripped the handle of his revolver as he pushed open the doors, the study, or rather, what should have been the study. Inside, the room was identical to Montague's study at his now decaying estate. The same grand oak desk, the same towering bookshelves, the same high-backed chair, pulled slightly askew. But the moment we stepped inside, I knew it was not the same room at all. It was too perfect. There was no dust, no wear on the leather bindings of the books, no scent of old paper. The brandy decanter on the desk was still full, untouched. Even the fireplace, though unlit, bore no trace of soot or ash. It was a replication, a memory of the study rather than the study itself. Holmes approached the desk, running a careful hand along its surface. "Curious," Lestrade exhaled. "This is madness. A house that doesn't exist. A room that looks like it's never been used. Where the hell are we, Holmes?" Holmes did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached for a book on the shelf, pulling it free. When he opened it, his face remained impassive, but I saw the shift in his eyes. "Watson," he said, "what do you see?" I stepped closer. My breath caught. The pages were blank, not aged, not worn, just empty, as though nothing had ever been written in them. I reached for another book, then another, each the same, a library of volumes with no words. Lestrade took a step back, rubbing his temples. "Holmes, I'm telling you, we shouldn't be here. This place, it's not real." Holmes glanced at him sharply. "Not real, Inspector, or merely rewritten. Before Lestrade could answer, something changed. A sound, faint, distant, yet unmistakable. A whisper. Holmes turned his head slightly, his sharp gaze locking onto the far side of the study. "Did you hear that?" I swallowed. "Yes." Lestrade nodded, his grip tightening on his revolver. "Where did it come from?" Holmes moved swiftly toward the wall, his hands ghosted over the bookshelf, fingers searching, feeling. And then, with a quiet click, a hidden panel slid open. A passage. Beyond it, a narrow corridor stretched into the darkness. The whisper had come from within. Holmes turned to us, his expression unreadable. It would seem our missing man was not merely erased. He stepped into the passage. He was taken. Chapter 12. The passage was narrow, the air stale with disuse, or rather, with a use that had been carefully concealed. The dim light from our lanterns flickered against the walls, revealing smooth stone rather than the expected brickwork of a London townhouse. It was as though the very architecture of the building had changed the moment we stepped beyond the study. Lestrade, ever sceptical, muttered under his breath, "I've had enough of secret doors and vanishing noblemen. If we find another room full of blank books, Holmes, I swear—" Holmes silenced him with a raised hand, his head tilted slightly, listening. Then we all heard it. A voice, faint, indistinct, not quite speech, yet unmistakably human. A whispering chorus from somewhere deeper within the passage. My grip tightened on the lantern handle. "Holmes, this isn't natural." Holmes merely pressed forward. "Nor is it entirely unnatural, Watson. It is simply something we do not yet understand." I exchanged a glance with Lestrade before reluctantly following. The passage twisted and turned in unnatural ways, impossible ways. At times the walls seemed too close together, then too far apart. Once or twice I felt certain we had doubled back, only to find ourselves in a new stretch of corridor. It was as if the house itself was shifting, resisting our presence. And then, at last, we reached the end. A heavy wooden door stood before us, its surface carved with strange swirling symbols. The eye, the same symbol from Montague's burned letter, was etched at the centre, its gaze unblinking. Holmes studied it for a long moment before producing his pocket-knife. Without hesitation, he pressed the blade's tip into a groove beneath the carving. There was a soft click. The door swung inward, and we stepped into the impossible. The chamber beyond was unlike anything I had seen before. The ceiling stretched, high above, lost in the gloom. Shelves lined the walls, hundreds of them, each filled with books, scrolls, and bound volumes. But what caught my attention most was the centre of the room. A great wooden chair sat atop a raised platform, and within it, a man. He was slumped forward, unmoving, his hands resting upon the arms of the chair as though he had been placed there, deliberately. His clothes were well tailored but slightly dishevelled, his dark hair falling over a face that was gaunt and pale. Holmes stepped forward. "Lord Montague, I presume." The man stirred. A sharp inhale. His head lifted, eyes darting frantically from Holmes to Lestrade to me. "No," he rasped. "No, you shouldn't be here." Lestrade frowned. "That's rather ungrateful, given that we came to find you." Montague's hands clenched the arms of the chair. "You don't understand. They will know." Holmes crouched beside him, his voice low but firm. "Who will know, Lord Montague?" Montague swallowed. "The ones who—" Then he stopped. His expression changed, confusion flickering across his face. His lips parted as if to speak again, but no sound came. Holmes's sharp gaze darkened. "Watson! His pulse!" I hurried forward, pressing my fingers to Montague's wrist. A cold chill ran through me. His pulse was there, but weak, fading, Lestrade stiffened. "Holmes, what's happening to him?" Holmes did not respond immediately. He studied Montague's face, his posture, the unnatural stillness overtaking him. Then, softly, he exhaled. "He is being forgotten." The words struck me like a blow. Lestrade's mouth opened, then closed, as if struggling to refute the idea. That's not possible." Holmes's expression was unreadable. "And yet it is happening before us." Montague's breath was shallow now, his eyes glassy. He looked at us as though struggling to remember who we were, who he was. I gripped his shoulder. "Stay with us, man. Tell us who did this." His mouth moved soundlessly. Holmes leaned closer. "Montague, if you do not wish to be erased, you must anchor yourself." Montague's eyes met his. Holmes nodded. "A name, a truth. Say it aloud. Hold on to it." For a moment there was nothing. Then a whisper. "Caro." Lestrade frowned. "Caro? What's that?" Holmes's fingers tightened around Montague's wrist. "A name," he murmured. "A clue." But Montague's lips had already stilled. His breath came no more, and as we watched, his body faded, not like a man dying, nor even like one decomposing with time. Simply gone, as though he had never been. Lestrade took a step back, horror creeping into his expression. "Holmes!" Holmes remained silent. His hand hovered over the space where Montague had been, his eyes dark with thought. Then he turned to us, his voice calm but firm. "We need to find Caro." Chapter 13 Silence filled the chamber where Lord Montague had once sat. A silence so profound that for a moment I questioned whether he had ever truly been there at all. The chair was empty, the air undisturbed, no body, no lingering warmth, no sign that a living man had occupied the space mere seconds ago. Lestrade let out a slow breath, his voice low and shaken. "Holmes, what in God's name did we just witness?" Holmes did not answer immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the vacant chair, his mind, I knew, working through the impossibility of what we had just seen. He straightened slowly, dusting off his coat, his movements precise, controlled. "We witnessed the end of a man," he murmured, "not by death nor by violence, but by the most absolute of fates, erasure." Lestrade shook his head. "No, that can't be. A man can be killed, a man can disappear, but no one just ceases to exist." Swallowed. And yet that is precisely what happened. Holmes finally turned to us, his expression unreadable. What matters now is what Montague left us before he vanished. Lestrade exhaled sharply. "Caro, that's all he gave us. A name, and we don't even know if it belongs to a person, a place, or something else entirely." Holmes's fingers tapped against the arm of the chair. "Oh, but we do, Inspector. Names are powerful things, and when a man on the brink of oblivion utters a single word, you can be certain it is the most important word in his existence." He turned on his heel. "We must find Caro, at once." We left the impossible chamber behind, retracing our steps through the shifting corridors until we emerged once more into the fog-laden streets of London. The house, the one that had not existed hours before, loomed behind us, silent and waiting. But there was no time to dwell on its unnatural presence. Holmes was already moving, his strides purposeful. "Where are we going?" I asked. Holmes barely glanced back. "To a place that does not forget." Lestrade frowned. "And where's that?" Holmes only smirked. "Scotland Yard." Despite Lestrade's protests that the Yard had already failed to produce Montague's records, Holmes insisted. And so we found ourselves once more beneath the flickering gas lamps of the archives, the weary night clerk raising an eyebrow as we strode inside. "Back again?" he asked, rubbing at his spectacles. "Didn't find what you were looking for the first time?" Holmes was already moving toward the restricted files. "I require every record containing the name Caro," he said briskly. Clark blinked. "Caro?" Holmes stilled. "You recognize it?" The clerk hesitated. I don't know. It sounds familiar, but I can't place it." He frowned, turning to his ledgers. "Strange. I feel as though I've filed something under that name before, but I don't recall what." Lestrade exhaled sharply. "Not this again!" Holmes's gaze sharpened. "You have seen the name, but you cannot remember it. Fascinating. And yet, if it were truly erased, you would not even recall its familiarity. That means something remains." The clerk looked uneasy. "Give me a moment." We watched as he moved to the archives, his fingers trailing along the spines of thick ledgers. He stopped abruptly, frowning. "That's odd," he muttered. Holmes stepped forward. "What is it?" The clerk pulled out a single book, a volume of missing persons and unsolved cases from decades past. He flipped through the pages, his brow furrowing. "There's an entry here," he said slowly, "but the name is blurred." I moved closer, and indeed, where a name should have been printed, there was only an unnatural smudge. Ink that had not faded with age, but had been distorted, as if reality itself had refused to hold it. Lestrade swore under his breath. First missing people, now missing words. Holmes, however, appeared unfazed. He retrieved a pencil from his coat and with careful precision rubbed the lead over the blank space. Slowly, a shape began to emerge, a word fighting against oblivion. A R-R-O-W-A breath of cold air seemed to whisper through the room. The clerk took a step back, his face pale. I don't like this, sir. This isn't natural." Holmes studied the name for a long moment. Then quietly he spoke. "Inspector Watson, we leave at once." Lestrade frowned. "Where to now?" Holmes closed the book and turned toward us. "To the last known residence of a man called Caro." Chapter 14. The hansom cab rattled through the fog-bound streets of London, its wheels cutting through the damp silence as we made our way toward the last known address of the name Montague had whispered before he vanished. Holmes had not spoken. Since leaving Scotland Yard, his sharp gaze fixed on the map he had reconstructed from the smudged records. Lestrade, for his part, had grown increasingly unsettled. "Holmes?" he muttered, shifting in his seat. "I'll be damned if I know what we're chasing any more. A dead man, a missing name, a house that wasn't there. This is beyond reason." Holmes finally looked up, his expression cool. "Reason, Inspector, is merely the measure of what we think we understand, and I fear this case has long since exceeded our grasp of conventional logic." Lestrade let out a humourless laugh. "So, you're telling me we're about to knock on the door of another ghost?" Holmes's smirk was faint but sharp. "Perhaps." cab came to a slow halt. The driver leaned over, his voice muffled by the mist. "This is it, sirs. Fitzroy Lane." I stepped out first, my boots landing on slick cobblestones. The street was deathly quiet, the houses standing in rigid silence beneath the gas lamp's feeble glow. Holmes descended next, adjusting his coat against the chill. Before us stood number 17 Fitzroy Lane. A house, not erased, not vanished, but undeniably wrong. Its brickwork was aged beyond the neighbouring buildings, its windows darkened as though never meant to hold light. The very air around it seemed thicker, as though the fog had chosen to gather more heavily here. Lestrade exhaled. "Well, that's inviting." Holmes strode forward, rapping his knuckles against the wooden door. The sound was dull, swallowed almost immediately. We waited. Silence. Holmes knocked again. Still no answer. He reached for the handle, and with a flick of his wrist turned it. The door swung open on its own, revealing nothing but unlit space within. Lestrade stiffened. "No, absolutely not. I know how this ends, and I am not stepping into—" Holmes walked inside. With a muttered curse, Lestrade followed. I took a steadying breath and did the same. The interior of the house was empty. Not abandoned, not ruined. Empty. No furniture, no decor, no sign of life. Just an open space where a home should have been. The only thing present was a desk, a single heavy wooden desk in the middle of the vast room, perfectly positioned as though waiting for someone. Holmes approached it carefully, his fingers grazing the surface. This house was not meant to be found. Lestrade exhaled sharply. "Well, we found it. Now what?" Holmes turned his attention to the desk's top drawer. With a quiet click, it slid open. Inside was one object, a notebook, worn, handwritten, ink faded with time. Holmes lifted it delicately, his fingers brushing over the first page. The name scrawled there sent a shiver through me. Jonathan Caro. Lestrade leaned in. "We've found him." Holmes flipped the pages. His expression for the first time flickered. A hint of something I could not name. "What is it, Holmes?" I asked. Holmes held up the notebook, revealing the next page. There, written in the same handwriting, was a single sentence. "If you are reading this, you have already been seen." The air in the house grew heavier. The silence was no longer empty. Somewhere, in the unseen depths of the house, a door creaked open. Holmes's jaw tightened. He snapped the notebook shut. "Watson, Lestrade, we leave, now!" Chapter 15. Holmes moved first, swift, precise. He tucked Jonathan Caro's notebook into his coat and turned sharply toward the door. His voice was calm, but there was no mistaking the urgency beneath it. "Watson! Lestrade! Move! Now!" Lestrade hesitated only for a moment before following suit. I needed no further prompting. The weight of the house pressed down upon us as we strode toward the open doorway. But something had changed. The air had thickened, carrying a weight that did not belong to mere silence. Shadows pooled unnaturally along the edges of the empty space, deeper than the dim gaslight should have allowed. Then came the sound, a single deliberate footstep from somewhere beyond the threshold of the room. Not the creak of old wood, nor the settling of an abandoned house. A step, a presence, and then another. I turned my head sharply towards the far corridor, my heart hammering. The darkness at the edge of the room seemed to move, shifting as though something within it had only just become aware of our presence. Holmes's stride did not falter. "Do not stop. Do not turn back." Lestrade, breathing sharply now, muttered, "What the hell is a whisper? Not words, not quite sound, but a knowing, a thing unseen pressing against the edges of perception." And suddenly, the very act of remembering felt like effort. I clenched my teeth, focusing on Holmes's sharp silhouette ahead. One step, then another. My thoughts began to fog, memories thinning, unravelling at the edges. What were we here for? Who were we looking for? Caro, yes, Caro. The name alone was a thread, keeping my mind from slipping into the void that pressed in from all sides. The whisper came again. Closer. Holmes reached the doorway first. He did not look back. His hand shot out, grabbing Lestrade's arm and pulling him through the threshold before I followed. The moment we stepped outside, the sensation broke, the weight lifted. The cold that had seeped into my bones receded. Night air was sharp, bracing, real. Lestrade stumbled forward, dragging a hand over his face. Christ almighty! Holmes pulled the door shut behind us with a firm click and exhaled. We were not meant to leave that house. I swallowed hard, forcing my mind to refocus. Holmes, what was that? Holmes did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his coat and retrieved Caro's notebook. He turned it over in his hands, his thumb grazing the worn edges of the cover. Then, in a voice quieter than I had ever heard from him, he murmured, "It was them." Back in the hansom cab, none of us spoke for several minutes. The steady clip of hooves against stone and the rhythmic creak of the wheels were the only sounds anchoring us to reality. I watched as Holmes carefully opened the notebook, flipping past the first warning. The next pages were filled with rushed, frantic writing, sentences crammed into the margins, ink smudged, entire lines crossed out and rewritten. Holmes skimmed the words, his expression sharpening with every turn of the page. Lestrade, still shaken, exhaled through his nose. "Well, what does it say?" Holmes did not answer at first. He flipped to a page near the middle, his brows furrowing as he read aloud. "I know they are watching. I write quickly, for I have little time. They will come soon. If you are reading this, I am already gone." I felt a shiver creep up my spine. Holmes continued, "They are not men. They have no names, no faces, no histories. They exist only in the spaces between. They curate the world, trimming away that which must be forgotten. They are the keepers of the unseen, the editors of existence." Lestrade shifted uncomfortably. Editors? You mean? Holmes turned the page. More of the same chaotic handwriting. "They do not kill. They do not destroy. They simply make things so that they never were." A deep, suffocating silence followed the words. Holmes's jaw tightened. "They erased Montigue." I exhaled slowly. "And now they're trying to erase Caro." Lestrade looked between us, his scepticism visibly faltering under the weight of what we had just experienced. "Holmes, if this is true, then we're dealing with something beyond reason. Something that can't be stopped." Holmes closed the notebook. His sharp gaze met mine. "Everything leaves a trace, Watson." Then he turned to Lestrade. Even them returned to Baker Street before dawn, exhausted but unwilling to rest. Holmes moved swiftly, lighting the gas lamps and laying out the notebook, the map from Godfrey, and the fragmented letter from Montigue onto the table like pieces of an unfinished puzzle. I watched as his mind worked, shifting between the pieces, piecing together patterns that only he could see. At last he spoke. Caro knew what he was up against, and despite their efforts, he left us a clue. He opened the notebook again, this time pointing to a single underlined word near the end. "St. Radegun's." Lestrade frowned. "A church?" Holmes nodded. "An old one, abandoned years ago. A place where records still remain, untouched by modern hands." He tapped the word again. "If Caro went there before he disappeared, it means he was looking for something. And if we find it first, we might learn the truth before they erase it," I finished. Holmes's smirk returned. "Precisely, Watson," Lestrade exhaled. "And if they are waiting for us there," Holmes reached for his coat, "then we shall finally see what lies behind the veil of the forgotten." His eyes gleamed with something sharper than intrigue, determination, because now it was not just a case. It was a battle against the unseen. Chapter 16. The night had not yet faded when we arrived at St. Radegun's. The old church stood at the very edge of London, where the city's gas lamps gave way to long-forgotten streets. The structure loomed before us, its stone walls worn and weathered, its spire barely visible against the sky's creeping dawn. Lestrade muttered, "I don't like this, not one bit." Holmes, adjusting his coat, merely replied, "Then I suggest you stay close, Inspector. This is not a place where one wishes to be alone." The church had been abandoned for decades, but unlike other forsaken buildings, it did not seem ruined by time. Instead, it had an unnatural emptiness, as though it had never been occupied at all. Holmes stepped forward, his fingers grazing the iron handle of the great wooden doors. The moment he touched it, a strange sensation prickled at the air, like a space long undisturbed suddenly recognizing an intrusion. With a slow creak, the doors swung inward. Darkness. Holmes stepped inside. Lestrade hesitated, his fingers hovering near his revolver. "I swear, Holmes, if something moves in there—" "Then I suggest you be quick on the trigger," Holmes replied, his voice smooth, unreadable. I swallowed my unease and followed. Inside, the vast chamber stretched before us, its high ceilings vanishing into shadow. The air was thick with the scent of old stone and untouched air. Rows of wooden pews sat in perfect order, unmarked by dust, as though waiting for a congregation that would never arrive. The only illumination came from the fractured moonlight filtering through the stained glass windows, their depictions of saints and martyrs obscured by age. Lestrade's voice was hushed. "What exactly are we looking for?" Holmes did not answer immediately. Instead, he turned to me. "Watson, the notebook." I retrieved Jonathan Caro's journal from my coat and handed it over. Holmes flipped through the worn pages, his sharp gaze searching for the clue Caro had left behind. Then his finger stopped at a line, written hastily, underlined twice. The last record remains beneath the stone. Holmes glanced up. His gaze swept the floor beneath us. The vast expanse of cold stone stretched across the church, each slab marked with worn inscriptions, names long since forgotten. "It must be one of these," I murmured. Lestrade let out a breath. "Oh, wonderful! You mean to say we have to tear up the floor of an abandoned church?" Holmes smirked. "Unless you have a better suggestion, Inspector." Lestrade cursed under his breath, but moved to assist. We searched, tracing each stone's markings, feeling for anything loose, out of place, forgotten. Then Holmes paused, his fingers pressed against a single slab near the altar. Unlike the others, its edges did not fit flush with the surrounding floor. It had been lifted before. He motioned for us to stand back. With a steady grip, he dug his fingers beneath the stone and heaved. With a dull scrape, the slab lifted. Beneath it was a hollow space, and within that space, a book. Holmes retrieved the object carefully. It was old, far older than any record we had seen thus far. The cover was black leather, its edges worn smooth by time. There was no title, no author, only the mark of the eye, etched in silver on the front. Lestrade stepped closer. "What the hell is that?" Holmes exhaled, brushing dust from the cover. "A record," he murmured. "One that was never meant to be read." I swallowed. "But what is it about?" Holmes did not answer immediately. Instead, he carefully unfastened the clasp and turned the first page. The writing inside was unlike anything I had ever seen. It was not the structured script of a historian, nor the careful hand of a scribe. It was chaotic. Notes, names, entire passages, scratched out and rewritten over themselves. Some sections were faded, as though the ink had been erased not by time, but by something deliberate. Holmes turned another page, then another, and then, finally, he stopped. There, among the sea of frantic writing, was a name. A name we knew. Hugh Montigue. Lestrade inhaled sharply. "Montigue, that's the missing nobleman, the one who vanished." Holmes's expression darkened. It would seem he was not the first. I leaned in, my eyes scanning the page. Montague's name was not alone. Beneath it, written in the same hurried hand, were dozens of others, names, titles, people we had never heard of, and yet, as I read them, something stirred in my mind, a flicker of familiarity, an echo of things half remembered. "Holmes," I whispered. "These names, they were all erased, weren't they?" Holmes nodded. "Precisely, Watson." His fingers traced the ink. This book, this record, was kept in secret. Whoever wrote it, they knew the truth. They fought against the erasure. Lestrade clenched his fists. "Then this proves it. Someone, something is behind this, and this book is the evidence." Holmes's expression did not change. "It is proof, yes." Then softly, "But only if we leave this place alive." A sound, not from the book, not from us, but from the far end of the church. A slow, deliberate footstep. Lestrade froze. His hand hovered near his revolver. "Tell me that was the wind." Holmes's gaze remained fixed ahead. It was not. Another footstep. Closer, then another. The air in the church changed. It was the same sensation we had felt in Caro's house. The weight of something unseen, something pressing against reality itself. Holmes snapped the book shut. "We leave, now." Lestrade didn't argue. We moved swiftly, retracing our steps toward the entrance. But the shadows seemed deeper now, stretching unnaturally across the floor. The pews that had been empty mere moments ago seemed less empty. The whisper returned, soft, indistinct, yet filled with knowing. I swallowed, my hands tightening into fists. "Holmes!" We reached the doors. Holmes pulled. They did not open. Lestrade swore. "There!" A voice, not from behind us, not from in front, from everywhere. "You should not have come here." A shape stirred within the darkness. Something was waiting. Holmes turned to us. His voice was steady. "Brace yourselves, gentlemen." And then the light vanished. Chapter 17, the light vanished. Not the dim glow of moonlight through stained glass, nor the flickering haze of the gas lamps outside. All light, all sense of space, was swallowed whole. It was not darkness as we understood. It was absence. The church had been there. The pews, the stone floor, the altar. And yet, in the space of a breath, they were gone. Lestrade cursed, his voice sharp, panicked. "Holmes, what the hell just—" A sound cut through the void. Not a footstep, not a whisper. Something closer. Holmes's voice was steady but low. "Do not speak, do not move." I swallowed hard, my pulse thundering in my ears. Something was here, not just watching, waiting. The whisper came again. "Your eyes are open. They should not be." The voice did not come from one direction. It came from everywhere, around us, above us, behind our very thoughts. It did not sound human. I clenched my jaw, gripping the notebook in my hands. Holmes had warned us against moving, but every instinct screamed for me to run. Lestrade exhaled sharply. "Holmes." A shape emerged, not a person, not even a shadow, a gap in reality itself. It was wrong, a figure without edges, its form shifting like ink in water. No face, no definition, just an absence in the shape of a man. Holmes exhaled softly. "Ah, so you do exist." The shape moved, not with steps, but as though the space between us had simply changed. The voice whispered again, "You are not meant to remember." The air grew thick, pressing against my skull, my mind, my thoughts. And then, in the span of a heartbeat, I forgot why we were here. I forgot what we had found. Holmes, Lestrade, the church, gone. A single thought remained hanging in the void. Who am I? My breath hitched. No, no, something was wrong. This was not real. A voice, distant, sharp, cut through the fog of my mind. Holmes! Watson! Hold on to the book! I gasped as the weight of it returned to my grasp. Reality snapped back. I was in the church, the pews, the altar, Lestrade, Holmes, and the thing before us. It had been inside my mind. Lestrade staggered back, clutching his head. What the hell was that? Holmes stood firm, his gaze locked on the figure. A crude attempt at erasure, Inspector, but an incomplete one. The shape did not move, but the whisper returned. You do not belong here. Holmes's voice was sharp. Neither do you. For the first time, the thing hesitated. Holmes's fingers traced the edge of Caro's notebook, turning to the page where Montague's name had been recorded alongside others. His voice was calm, precise. You have spent your existence wiping the ledger of history, but tell me. His sharp eyes lifted. What happens when someone keeps a record of you? The air shifted. The shape's form wavered. Holmes nodded. I see. You erase others, but you fear being written down yourselves, named, remembered. The whisper twisted. You should not have come. Holmes took a step forward, and yet here we are. The Dieu's figure pulsed. The church trembled, and then it lunged. Holmes moved first. Watson, the book. I flipped the page. A name, a date, a record. I spoke it aloud. The thing screamed, not with sound, but with reality itself. The air fractured. The very space around us shuddered. Lestrade fired his revolver, the bullet vanishing into nothingness. The figure twisted, recoiling. Holmes's voice was ice. You cannot erase what has already been written. The figure faltered until, in the space of a breath, it was gone. Not destroyed, not killed, just absent. The silence that followed was suffocating. Lestrade staggered forward. Tell me that was a bloody hallucination. Holmes exhaled, closing the notebook with careful precision. No, Inspector. He turned to face us, his expression unreadable. It was proof. I swallowed, still gripping the book. My hands were shaking. Then we know now. They exist, and they can be fought. Holmes smirked. Indeed, Watson. Lestrade ran a hand over his face. Christ almighty, I need a drink. Holmes tucked the notebook into his coat. Then let us leave this place. We have work to do. And without another word, we stepped into the cold morning light. Chapter 18. The cold morning air bit at my skin as we stepped out of St. Radigan's, leaving behind the unnatural weight of the church and the thing that had lurked within it. The dawn was breaking over London, casting a pale light that felt feeble, as though the city itself was uncertain we had truly survived the night. Lestrade inhaled deeply, rubbing his temples. I still don't know what the hell we just faced, Holmes. His voice was raw, unsteady, and to be honest, I'm not sure I want to. Holmes adjusted his coat, the notebook from Jonathan Caro tucked securely beneath his arm. Then I suggest you prepare yourself, Inspector, because this is far from over. I tightened my grip on my cane, my mind still reeling. Holmes, we forced it back, but we haven't stopped them. If they could erase Montague and nearly erase us, what's to stop them from trying again? Holmes's sharp gaze flickered toward me. Knowledge, Watson. We now possess something they do not. A record. He tapped the notebook. Lestrade exhaled. If that's the case, then we need to make sure that record doesn't vanish the moment we look away. Holmes nodded. Precisely. Which means our next step is ensuring this book is preserved where they cannot reach it. A silence fell between us. I understood the gravity of what Holmes was implying. We had uncovered something that was never meant to be seen, and if these entities could erase names, records, entire people, then keeping this book safe would require more than simply hiding it away. Lestrade cleared his throat. Right. So where does one store evidence against creatures that can rewrite reality? Holmes allowed a small smirk. Somewhere beyond their reach. The hansom cab rattled through the London streets, carrying us toward a place Holmes had chosen without explanation. The morning fog was lifting, revealing the familiar bustle of the waking city. It was almost jarring, as though we had stepped from a nightmare into a world that did not know it had nearly lost something. Holmes spoke little during the ride. He turned the pages of Caro's notebook, his keen eyes scanning its entries, with the precision of a man reconstructing a crime from a single drop of blood. Finally, he looked up. "Watson, what do you know of the Codex collection?" I frowned. "You refer to the library beneath the Royal Society?" Lestrade blinked. "The Royal Society? You mean the place where they keep all those scientific papers and manuscripts?" Holmes nodded. "Indeed. But beyond the well-known archives lies something far more obscure. A vault of forgotten knowledge. Manuscripts, discoveries, even entire research papers that were deemed too dangerous, too incomprehensible, or too disruptive to be shared with the world." I sat forward. "You mean to place Caro's notebook there?" Holmes's expression was unreadable. "It is the safest option. If the Watchers can erase information from libraries, personal records, even Scotland Yard itself, then we must find a place beyond their reach. The Codex collection is not widely known. It is protected, and it is not part of any public record." Lestrade let out a slow breath. "And what if they can reach even there?" Holmes's gaze darkened. "Then we will learn just how far their influence extends." We arrived at Burlington House, home of the Royal Society, just as the city fully stirred to life. Holmes led the way through the grand halls, his footsteps purposeful as he navigated past scholars and fellows who paid us little heed. At last, we reached a small, unassuming door tucked away beneath the grander chambers of the Society. A brass plaque beside it read, "Restricted Archives." Codex collection. Holmes rapped his knuckles twice against the door. A few moments passed before it opened, revealing a thin, elderly man with silvered hair and an expression of faint disapproval. His sharp eyes took us in, lingering on Holmes. "Mr. Holmes." His voice was smooth, practiced. "I assume you are here on business of some delicate nature." Holmes inclined his head. "Indeed, Mr. Aldwych. We have a manuscript that requires safekeeping." Aldwich's gaze flicked to the notebook in Holmes's hand. "And why, pray, would I accept such an addition to the Codex?" Holmes did not blink. "Because this knowledge is not merely lost. It is being stolen. If it vanishes from our world entirely, then even the great records of the Royal Society will be incomplete. And I suspect, Mr. Aldwych, that you do not appreciate gaps in knowledge." Aldwych studied him for a long moment. Then, with a slow nod, he stepped aside. "Follow me." The Codex collection was unlike any archive I had seen before. Rows of locked shelves, thick tomes bound in leather, scrolls stored in glass cases, all resting beneath low, flickering gaslight. This was a place of knowledge that had been hidden, buried beneath history itself. Aldwych led us toward a particular cabinet, retrieving a heavy iron key from his pocket. With careful movements he turned the lock, revealing a compartment lined with black velvet. Holmes placed Caro's notebook within. Aldwych closed the cabinet with a soft click and turned to Holmes. "It will not leave this place." Holmes nodded. "Ensure that it does not." Aldwich's lips curled into the faintest of smirks. "You have my word, Mr. Holmes, though I suspect those who hunt such knowledge will not be pleased." Holmes's gaze did not waver. Let them try. We stepped back into the morning air, the weight of the case still pressing upon us. But for the first time since it had begun, I felt a strange certainty. We had won a battle. Holmes exhaled, adjusting his coat. "The record is safe, for now." Lestrade shook his head. "And what happens if they come for it? If they come for us?" Holmes gave a rare, quiet smile. "Then they will find that we are not so easily erased." A silence settled between us. Then Lestrade chuckled, shaking his head. "Damn you, Holmes, you always drag me into these things." Holmes smirked. "And yet you always follow." I exhaled, my mind still churning. "Holmes, we stopped them this time. But they're still out there. They will erase more people, more knowledge." Holmes turned toward me, his gaze sharp, thoughtful. "Then we will be watching, Watson." He slipped his hands into his coat pockets, stepping into the London morning with his usual certainty. After all, his voice was low, but edged with steel. Someone must remember. Chapter 19. The afternoon sun cast long shadows over Burlington House as we stepped away from the Codex collection, leaving Caro's notebook secured in the depths of an archive beyond the reach of ordinary men. It should have felt like a victory, proof that we had, for now, kept the truth from vanishing. But as we walked through the London streets, past the murmur of bustling pedestrians and the distant clip of horse-drawn carriages, I could not shake the feeling that something was still watching us. Lestrade rubbed a hand over his face, his usual scepticism hanging by a thread. "Tell me, Holmes, do you really believe that's the end of it, that they'll just let it go?" Holmes exhaled through his nose. "No, Inspector, I do not." I felt a cold weight settle in my chest. "Then what happens next?" Holmes did not answer immediately. His gaze flicked toward a shadowed alleyway as we passed, watching, waiting, calculating. Then he simply said, "We prepare." Back at 221B Baker Street, Holmes wasted no time. The fire burned low in the hearth. Our tea remained untouched, and the scent of tobacco curled in the air as he filled the room with pages of notes, loose papers, and hand-drawn maps of London. Lestrade leaned against the mantelpiece, arms crossed, watching as Holmes worked with that unnerving, single-minded focus. I sat across from him, pen in hand, trying to make sense of what we had uncovered. "So, what are we looking for?" I asked at last. Holmes barely glanced up. "Patterns, Watson. If Caro's records are correct, this is not the first time they have erased someone." He gestured toward a list of names. Montigue was but the latest. But what of the others? Lestrade frowned. "They're already gone, Holmes. How do you investigate a crime that's been undone?" Holmes finally looked up, his sharp eyes gleaming. "By searching for the gaps they left behind." I frowned, leaning closer. "What do you mean?" Holmes tapped a blank space in his notes. "Every person they erase leaves an absence, not just in records, but in memory." But memory, my dear Watson, is an imprecise thing. We forget names, but we remember faces. We forget places, but we recall the feeling that something should be there. We cannot trace what has vanished, but we can trace the echo of its absence. Lestrade exhaled sharply. And how exactly do you propose we do that? Holmes smirked. By asking the only people who never truly forget. Lestrade frowned. And who would that be? Holmes reached for his coat. The city's ghosts, Inspector. Night had fallen by the time we reached South Bank, where the Thames lapped against the docks in sluggish waves. The city never truly slept, but here, away from the grandeur of Westminster and the gaslit streets of the Strand, the air felt different, heavier, as though London itself carried secrets too old to be spoken. We walked toward a collection of run-down buildings near the riverfront. Smoke curled from chimneys, mingling with the fog that crept in from the water. Lestrade muttered, "And these ghosts of yours, Holmes, who exactly are we looking for?" Holmes smirked. "Men who live in the margins of society, Inspector. Thieves, informants, men who have seen things that should not be seen. They are forgotten in the eyes of the law, but not by me." I understood at once. The irregulars. Holmes had long kept a network of informants. People who lurked in the spaces where most dared not look. Street children, dock workers, old men who sat on the corners of London's forgotten streets, watching the world move past them. And if someone had seen something that should not exist, they would know. We entered a small, dimly lit alehouse tucked between two buildings. The place smelled of damp wood and pipe smoke. A few figures sat hunched over their drinks, muttering among themselves. Holmes scanned the room, his gaze settling on a tall, wiry man with a scar along his jaw. "Mr. Cray," Holmes said smoothly. The man stiffened, then turned his head just enough to see us. His eyes narrowed. "Holmes, thought you'd got yourself a better class of company these days." Holmes smirked. "And yet, here I am." Cray grunted, setting his drink down. "That means you need something." "Information," Holmes replied. Cray exhaled, shaking his head. "You always do." He gestured to the seat across from him. "What is it this time? Another runaway lord? Some bloke faking his own death?" Holmes slid into the chair, his expression turning serious. "Tell me, Mr. Cray, have you heard of any places that should not exist?" Cray hesitated. Then, slowly, he exhaled. "You don't want to be asking about that, Holmes?" Lestrade stiffened. "Why?" Cray gave a low chuckle, though there was no humour in it. "Because the last man I heard asking about that, he ain't around anymore." Holmes leaned in. "Who?" Cray's fingers tapped against the wooden table. "A fellow came through here weeks back. Kept talking about places that didn't stay where they were supposed to. Asked the wrong sort of questions." He exhaled. Then one day, gone, like he'd never been. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. "And his name?" Cray hesitated. "That's the thing, Doc. I knew his name. Spoke to him 3 nights in a row. But now," his hands curled into fists, "I can't remember it." A silence fell over the table. Lestrade swore under his breath. "Bloody hell!" Holmes's eyes darkened. "Then it is happening again." Cray leaned forward. "Listen, Holmes, I don't know what you're digging into, But I can tell you one thing, it ain't just people vanishing. Lestrade frowned. What do you mean? Cray exhaled. I mean, I walked past a street 2 nights ago that wasn't there yesterday. And last week I tried to find a building that's been standing for 40 years. And it was gone. His gaze was grim. It's not just names they erase, Holmes. It's the world itself. Holmes sat back, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he nodded. Then, gentlemen, he murmured, we are running out of time. Chapter 20. The night air pressed down upon us as we left. The south bank, Cray's words, still hanging in the air like an unshaken fog. It's not just names they erase, Holmes. It's the world itself. Lestrade walked stiffly beside me, his silence unusual even for him. I could tell that, despite all he had seen, he was still grappling with the reality of what we were chasing, and I could not blame him. This was no ordinary case. No criminal to apprehend, no murderer to outwit. We were fighting against something that had no face, no past, and worse yet, we were running out of time. Holmes led us through the dim streets, with quick, decisive steps. He had not spoken since we left the alehouse, his mind clearly working through the latest revelation. Finally, I broke the silence. Holmes, if places are disappearing, if entire sections of London are vanishing, how do we even begin to track them? Holmes's eyes flickered toward me. The same way we track any anomaly, Watson, by identifying what should be there but is not, Lestrade grunted. Easier said than done. Holmes ignored him. Cray's description was imprecise, but it tells us one thing. This phenomenon is accelerating. If they are not only erasing people, but entire locations, then we must assume they are growing bolder. He quickened his pace. And that means there must be a pattern. I frowned. You believe there's a design behind what's vanishing? Of course, Holmes murmured. No action, human or otherwise, is without intent. Lestrade muttered, And how do you intend to prove that? Holmes smiled slightly. By walking into the void, Inspector. We turned a corner, and I immediately understood before us lay nothing. I froze in my tracks. The street before us, a street that should have existed, was simply missing, not barricaded, not under construction. Gone. An unnatural emptiness stretched before us, as if the very fabric of London had been cut away. The surrounding buildings stood undisturbed, their brick walls and shuttered windows forming an eerie border around a space where a road, a neighbourhood, should have been. Lestrade's breath hitched. Bloody hell! Holmes's eyes gleamed. Fascinating! I swallowed against the unnatural stillness. Holmes, what are we looking at? Holmes stepped forward, his gaze sweeping the edges of the missing space. A wound, Watson. A tear in the map of reality itself. Lestrade shook his head. No, this is impossible. I've walked these streets before. There should be a row of shops here. He gestured wildly toward the void. Where the hell did they go? Holmes crouched at the edge of the nothingness, his fingers grazing the cobblestones where the road abruptly ended. His expression was unreadable. They were taken. A silence stretched between us. I stepped closer, my stomach churning. The absence felt wrong. Even as I stared, I felt my mind struggling to hold on to the memory of what had been here. Shops, a pub, A florist, I think. But the details were slipping away, like ink dissolving in water. I gritted my teeth. Holmes, I can't remember. Holmes looked up sharply. Do not fight it, Watson. The moment you question what has been erased, you risk being erased with it. Lestrade cursed, taking a step back. You're telling me this bloody thing can make us forget, just like that? Holmes rose to his feet. That is precisely what I am telling you, Inspector. I swallowed against the knot in my throat. Then how do we fight something we cannot remember? Holmes smiled. By leaving a mark it cannot erase. Holmes withdrew a small vial of ink from his coat pocket, along with a fountain pen. Without hesitation, he crouched and scrawled something onto the nearest intact cobblestone. A single word, remember. The moment his pen left the stone, something shifted. The air grew thicker, heavier, as if reality itself protested the act of defiance. Lestrade swore. What the hell was that? Holmes stood, slipping the pen back into his coat. A challenge. Shivered. The moment the word had been written, a pressure had settled around us. The world itself seemed to breathe, not in relief, but in warning. Holmes dusted off his hands. Now, we wait. Lestrade's eyes widened. Wait? Wait for what? Holmes's expression was razor-sharp. For them to notice. It did not take long. The air around us shifted. The edges of the missing street seemed to ripple, as though something unseen was stirring beneath its surface. Then, from the darkness, came the whisper. You should not have done that. Lestrade stumbled back, drawing his revolver. Oh no, 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 no. Holmes remained perfectly still. His voice was measured, unshaken. Ah, so you do speak. The whisper was closer now. You do not belong here. Holmes smiled faintly. And yet, here I stand. The shadows moved, not in the way light should shift, not with the sway of fog or the flicker of a gas lamp. Something was coming. I could feel it. Holmes did not look away. You fear a single word. How very curious. The whisper curled around us. You do not understand what you threaten. Holmes's smirk did not fade. Oh, but I do. That is what unsettles you, is it not? Lestrade exhaled. Holmes stepped forward. For the first time since this nightmare began, he was challenging them. His voice was quiet, but edged with steel. You erase names. You erase places. You rewrite the world and expect no one to notice. But I have noticed, and now I ask you. He gestured to the missing street. What happens when someone refuses to forget? A pause. Then the whisper changed. It was no longer a warning. It was something worse, a promise. Then you, too, will vanish. The ground beneath. Our feet shuddered. The void expanded. Lestrade's eyes widened. Holmes! Holmes grabbed my arm. Watson, run! And before I could react, the world collapsed. Chapter 21. The world collapsed. Not in the way a building crumbles or the way ice shatters beneath weight, but in the way a thought is forgotten. The street around us folded inward, like ink spilling into an unseen abyss. The ground beneath our feet became uncertain, shifting, as if we stood on the edge of an unfinished sentence. Holmes's grip on my arm tightened. "Run, Watson, now!" I did not hesitate. Lestrade cursed loudly, but followed suit, sprinting with us as the void behind us expanded. Them edges of buildings, of lamplight, of London itself, fading, unravelling, vanishing. A whisper coiled around us. "You will not leave." Holmes did not look back. His voice was sharp, unwavering. "Faster!" The emptiness rushed toward us like a rising tide. Every step felt heavier, like moving through thick fog, like something was pulling at the edges of our minds, trying to strip away the memory that we had ever been here at all. Then, ahead, the word, scrawled in ink, bold and defiant. "Remember!" Holmes lunged toward it, and the world snapped back. I staggered forward, gasping for breath. The moment we crossed the threshold of the word Holmes had written, the force pulling us back ceased. Lestrade collapsed against the side of a brick wall, breathing heavily. What the hell was that? Holmes straightened, adjusting his coat as though he had merely taken an evening stroll. A test. I turned to him, still catching my breath. A test? Holmes, we were nearly erased. Holmes met my gaze, his expression unreadable. Yes, and now we know their limits. Lestrade let out a breathless laugh, rubbing a hand over his face. That's what you were doing, testing their limits. Holmes, they nearly wiped us off the bloody map. Holmes exhaled, his keen gaze flickering toward the void that had nearly consumed us. But something had changed. The missing street was still gone, but its edges had stilled. The erasure had stopped, halted by the single word he had written. Remember. I swallowed hard. Holmes, I don't understand. How did you know that would work? Holmes gave a small, satisfied smirk. Because, Watson, words have power, and these entities, whatever they are, fear only one thing, being written into existence. Lestrade stared at him. You mean to tell me that all of this, these missing people, these erased streets, are happening because they don't want to be noticed? Holmes's smile faded. Not merely noticed, Inspector, recorded. A silence settled between us. I shivered against the night air. Then they fear history itself. Holmes nodded. Precisely, Watson. And that means we still have one final move to make. I frowned. What do you mean? Holmes turned back toward the void, where the missing street should have been. His voice was quiet, but resolute. We write them down. Back at 221B Baker Street, Holmes wasted no time. He cleared the table, spread out our remaining notes, and began writing. I followed his lead, every name we could recall, every place that had vanished, every trace of the ones who erased. We documented it all. Lestrade, despite his skepticism, pulled up a chair and began scribbling as well. I swear, if this is the strangest thing I've ever had to write in a report. Holmes smirked. I assure you, Inspector, it will be the most important one as well. We wrote for hours, every detail meticulously preserved. And as we did, I felt something change, a tension in the air, a subtle resistance, as though something was watching. Holmes must have felt it too, because he spoke without looking up. Let them watch. His pen scratched against the paper. They fear being seen, Watson, and that is precisely why we must not look away. Lestrade muttered, If I wake up tomorrow and forget all this, I'm going to kill you both." Holmes chuckled. "Then I shall have Watson write that down as well." I exhaled, rubbing my tired eyes. "And what if this isn't enough, Holmes? What if they come for the records? For us?" Holmes closed the notebook with a decisive snap. "Then we ensure the world remembers before they can forget." A silence settled in the room. Then, softly, "Some cases, Watson, are not meant to be solved." Holmes's gaze flickered toward the window, where the city stretched beyond, unchanged, oblivious. "But this one," he murmured, "will not be forgotten." Days passed. No further disappearances were reported. No new voids opened in the streets of London. It was as if the city had settled, as though our act of writing had forced something to hold its shape. Then, one morning, a letter arrived. No sender, no return address, just a single envelope placed neatly on our doorstep. Holmes opened it with careful fingers. Inside was one sheet of paper. A single sentence was written in neat, unfamiliar script. "We see you now, Mr. Holmes." The ink had not dried. Holmes exhaled softly. Then he folded the letter, placed it inside his coat, and turned toward the window, watching as London carried on, unaware. And for the first time since this case had begun, I was certain we were not alone. Chapter 22. The world collapsed, not in the way a building crumbles or the way ice shatters beneath weight, but in the way a thought is forgotten. The street around us folded inward, like ink spilling into an unseen abyss. The ground beneath our feet became uncertain, shifting, as if we stood on the edge of an unfinished sentence. Holmes's grip on my arm tightened. "Run, Watson! Now!" I did not hesitate. Lestrade cursed loudly, but followed suit, sprinting with us, as the void behind us expanded. The edges of buildings, of lamplight, of London itself, fading, unravelling, vanishing. A whisper coiled around us. "You will not leave." Holmes did not look back. His voice was sharp, unwavering, faster. The emptiness rushed toward us like a rising tide. Every step felt heavier, like moving through thick fog, like something was pulling at the edges of our minds, trying to strip away the memory that we had ever been here at all. Then ahead, the word scrawled in ink, bold and defiant. "Remember." Holmes lunged toward it, and the world snapped back. I staggered forward, gasping for breath. The moment we crossed the threshold of the word Holmes had written, the force pulling us back ceased. Lestrade collapsed against the side of a brick wall, breathing heavily. "What the hell was that?" Holmes straightened, adjusting his coat as though he had merely taken an evening stroll. "A test!" I turned to him, still catching my breath. "A test? Holmes, we were nearly erased." Holmes met my gaze, his expression unreadable. "Yes, and now we know their limits." Lestrade let out a breathless laugh, rubbing a hand over his face. "That's what you were doing? Testing their limits? Holmes, they nearly wiped us off the bloody map." Holmes exhaled, his keen gaze flickering toward the void that had nearly consumed us. But something had changed. The missing street was still gone, but its edges had stilled. The erasure had stopped, halted by the single word he had written. "Remember." I swallowed hard. "Holmes, I don't understand. How did you know that would work? Holmes gave a small, satisfied smirk. Because, Watson, words have power, and these entities, whatever they are, fear only one thing: being written into existence. Lestrade stared at him. You mean to tell me that all of this, these missing people, these erased streets, are happening because they don't want to be noticed? Holmes's smile faded. Not merely noticed, Inspector. Recorded. A silence settled between us. I shivered against the night air. Then they fear history itself? Holmes nodded. Precisely, Watson. And that means we still have one final move to make. I frowned. What do you mean? Holmes turned back toward the void, where the missing street should have been. His voice was quiet, but resolute. We write them down. Back at 212-1B Baker Street, Holmes wasted no time. He cleared the table, spread out our remaining notes, and then began writing. I followed his lead, every name we could recall, every place that had vanished, every trace of the ones who erased. We documented it all. Lestrade, despite his skepticism, pulled up a chair and began scribbling as well. I swear, if this is the strangest thing I've ever had to write in a report. Holmes smirked. I assure you, Inspector, it will be the most important one as well. We wrote for hours, every detail meticulously preserved, and as we did, I felt something change. A tension in the air, a subtle resistance, as though something was watching. Holmes must have felt it too, because he spoke without looking up. Let them watch. His pen scratched against the paper. They fear being seen, Watson, and that is precisely why we must not look away. Lestrade muttered, If I wake up tomorrow and forget all this, I'm going to kill you both. Holmes chuckled. Then I shall have Watson write that down as well. I exhaled, rubbing my tired eyes. And what if this isn't enough, Holmes? What if they come for the records? For us? Holmes closed the notebook with a decisive snap. Then ensure the world remembers before they can forget. A silence settled in the room. Then softly, Some cases, Watson, are not meant to be solved. Holmes's gaze flickered toward the window, where the city stretched beyond, unchanged, oblivious. But this one, he murmured, will not be forgotten. Days passed. No further disappearances were reported. No new voids opened in the streets of London. It was as if the city had settled, as though our act of writing had forced something to hold its shape. Then, one morning, a letter arrived. No sender, no return address, just a single envelope placed neatly on our doorstep. Holmes opened it with careful fingers. Inside was one sheet of paper. A single sentence was written in neat, unfamiliar script. "We see you now, Mr. Holmes." The ink had not dried. Holmes exhaled softly. Then he folded the letter, placed it inside his coat, and turned toward the window, watching as London carried on unaware. And for the first time since this case had begun, I was certain we were not alone. End of the case. Final words. The case of the forgotten name is closed, but the truth lingers, somewhere beyond memory, beyond time. Holmes may have won a battle against the unseen, but the war is never truly over, because some things once remembered refuse to be forgotten.